That would make sense about the SU4 switching it off to AU to AG. It's kind of like, my case, or again, that garnishment case, realistically. You can see the problem because I said it in the video. This is logically working out the letter A, how you would go derive all constitutional amendments by what it is in the and or flip-flop. But it almost reads like constitutional law or law in general is wrong by the standard because it didn't go about creating language. It went about being the Psi-4 process, right? After these events happen, then there's a collision, you got to redo it. But is it correct? Well, why do I say that? Well, just because somebody went to jail doesn't necessarily mean that it was the zenith of best options and whether they knew it was best for them or not. An implied danger that somebody didn't know was there, but it's almost impossible to prove as a thing without an elevator shaft with a sign that says, please use another elevator without reason in a city building. Now, whether it's a city building or just the tenants or not the landlord's immunity, because you still have to consider that the safety of the property because of eroded or untended, improperly maintenance equipment brings the landlord now into liability instead of you are where you live. And again, you're still on insurance for living on their property because it's not your full property. It's not like they simple deeded it to you, right? It's quite a bit of a different thing, but you can kind of see how that's an important system. And usually I would assume that I'm a strong nuclear force. I'm going to come in and penetrate this system because I can. I don't give a shit about BAR, your standards, or whether the internet's involved with it or not. If those compelling arguments are something that is constitutionally grievanced here, I couldn't naturally normal thinking unless to assume that now I am not your normal perceiving person about any issues. But how can I not be a normal perceiving person? I had assumed by utilizing BAR, again, in the Klein bottle here, to take that practice BAR and say, not only is this a judgment of criteria, the masseuse's certifications and licenses, but as a standard, if I get to these goals, well, then there's a reasonable argument to say that there was a uniform way of looking at that system, and I should, because constitutionally the majority in this probability should also do that as well. Without knowing that control data here as far as BAR, well, then it's like saying I don't have my statement ready for the jury and still allowing them to do this. I would imagine because I'm such an experienced about something like this, I'm picking up on some pings on this very high end of the situation, but at the same time, I need to be able to process out this specific Rick. I could give a shit about the questionnaire in itself. I have to be able to form these types of linear algebra as though I won't have a parity error based on the specific law function, because with great power comes with great responsibility. If I thought it was going to kick it up, or it gives me this much trouble comparatively to the best evidence act, then I'm saying then I presented this better than the legal system. And legal system are still people. And people are subject to not always think about it in the same way as the majority that may be expressed around them because of the local non-locality salt tax that comes into a situation like this. And there it's just a space of alpha linear time functions realistically, or time dilation. Something's not exactly lining up, or some version of Pauli's exclusionary started to phase into existence, which mandated this draw of attention to quantify it using those Feynman diagrams because they result better to most, if not all, the barn bore about what these subcases will do. And knowing that, would I still say that you need this SU2 and SU3 process? Well, Clearly, there needs to be this routing about what a constitutional law is. First Amendment isn't necessarily the respect for the court, but if I laid out the map and they didn't respect that, then you're not respecting something that most people would quantify as a strong religious figure that covers multiple ranges of the situation. I didn't exactly word that out right, but I'd imagine the jury would bite. Now, with that said, that may not go to the jury. But this is where this whole thing gets to be crazy of criminal law, civil law, state law, because it's still within the civil privy, and those things are still under constitutional scrutiny as far as a higher court determining whether the emotional damages were relative or not in this case, because it's still fairly subjective as far as a math equation's details, not exactly an art painting at a yard sale. But here, it wouldn't be a military base either against the morality act of whatever that makes guys over 65 wear button-down brown pants, or a policy about a ruling in a court system that is a violation of civil or most likely the 7th Civil Act to deal with why you shouldn't, and again, whether it's color, race, gender, a specific clothing that I wear. What's the difference between a ball cap and a turban? If a turban's allowed in there because of religious standard, that's what their people do, then why isn't a ball cap? Well, let's talk about the physical characteristics here. What does a turban do? Does that not provide it here? So then do you violate those things, but my Constitution being my amendment, being my first thing I have to check here because of so many people independently thinking that way. Again, I'm getting off the rails here a little bit, but generally that's going to describe du, right? You know, I have to find the new manifolded derivative where we can write as du. I'm this judge, but I'm in the circumstances of the person, and that is the low end of the circumstances. We're looking at the -1 standards of what this is, or the bare minimum before this idea of death starts to come in. Because that'll radically change the terms, because you might have survived it, Pauli's exclusionary principle. It's not like this is a zero probability that people don't get through this. Oh, yeah, I'm having a ball. Yeah.